going to do that now, but I won't start over. At any rate, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our final Implicit Bias webinar series presentation. And I want to tell you a little bit about the project first before I introduce Claudia. And I'm super excited to be working with her today on this. The Implicit Bias in Workforce Education Project is a collaboration with 4 centers of excellence: Marine, Education, Construction, and Agriculture, and the Machinists Institute. And the purpose of the project is to deliver professional development topics related to implicit bias to break down barriers for student and faculty achievement and success. We're very proud of the project, and we're in our 4th year now of delivery. Last year, we started the webinar series. The response to the webinar series was so strong. We knew we had to do it again this year, and we're making plans already to deliver another series of great webinars next year. So we're delighted to have you all here. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. This hour will go by quickly. Please, if you have any comments or questions, please put those into chat. Claudia will be watching that, but we'll also have some time at the end. We'll facilitate those questions for her. Kim Davis will be loading up some resources in chat, and at the end, we'll have a survey, a very quick survey link for you as well. We really do depend on your feedback in the surveys. We very much appreciate that. It really helps guide the work that we do. Now, on to the star of the show. I'm delighted to introduce to you Claudia Avendaño-Ibarra. Claudia is a colleague of mine here at Skagit Valley College. I've had the pleasure of working with her on the update of the professional technical skill standards as well this year. Claudia is tenured faculty of human services here at Skagit Valley College. She has extensive experience and expertise on the topic of student homelessness. So we're delighted to be able to have her today to present this topic to you. And before I trip over any of my sentences, because I'm doing a lot of that this morning, Claudia, I'm going to turn it right over to you, and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Allow me to share screen here. Oh, I'm still disabled for sharing screen, Anne. If you could
right
give
now,
me that
I apologize.
privilege. All right, let's give it just a second. Let me try again. Oh, not quite.
Hang on. Kim, you'll need to do that. You'll need to enable Claudia as co-host.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor. It's quite humbling to hear, my colleagues introduce me, and I'm really excited about the topic of today because it's a topic of much passion for me. And so I want to say, let me move people around here so I can see everybody. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. As shared by Anne, I've been privileged with the opportunity to work with the homeless and unhoused population through several agencies. Just a couple of quick stories here. When I was serving as with the Division of Children, Youth, and Family Services as their supervisor, many of the families that were working really hard to keep their children safe were really struggling with homelessness. And my life changed when I was given an opportunity to serve as director of the YMCA Oasis Teen Shelter. And I would say that many of us refuse to believe that in the United States, we have children that are homeless, but we do. And the reasons are very complex. And I have way too many stories that I wish I had time to tell you. And I really wish and the possibilities. And I wish that this was collective and ongoing, and maybe we can create that. But today, oh, I see a note that says that my internet is unstable. Oh my goodness, I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to continue assuming that you can. So as I was saying, I hope that today we start this conversation, and I hope that this conversation continues, and that you that it continues with you as the leader you are in your community and at your school, and that it continues with your circle of influence, with your job, and everything that you do. Currently, I am a community college faculty, as Ann states. And so when I got this position, I thought that I'd be teaching and no longer doing so much social work or crisis work. Silly me. I do teach, and I love that. But one of the biggest surprises for me as a community college instructor is that many of my students are homeless. And I've learned that school is their safe haven, and that school is where they are taking their steps towards permanent housing and towards healing. And so that was one big surprise for me. I want to just take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. It is important for us to recognize the First Nations that have been here since time immemorial, so that we don't forget the colonial history. So to help us remember and recognize the very unique experience of our First Nations brothers and sisters. And so we offer this acknowledgement. I am today connecting with you all, and I'm living in the homelands of the Coast Salish peoples locally. For me, that includes, and for many of you listening, but it's different depending on where you are. For me, it includes Upper Skagit, Samish, Swinomish, Tulalip, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Soxotl, as well as the Lummi and Nooksack nations. Occupation of this land came and comes, this is still happening today, with disease, displacement, violence, migration, and loss of land, as well as water and many cultural practices. We celebrate that Native peoples and nations have survived. We seek to affirm their history, communities, and voices, calling for the protection of Earth. And we honor their contributions. And the best way to do so is by engaging in systemic change. May today be an opportunity for change. So today we're going to review briefly implicit bias. I know that many of you have experienced, and I also know that many of you have joined the amazing Dr. Rita Cameron Whitting, as well as Zenobia Harris, to learn. And so I invite us to review today and consider the role of bias when it comes to understanding, serving, and advocating for our unhoused and homeless brothers and sisters. So the information today will be introductory, and I really hope that it opens that door and that it sparks the desire to continue to learn and to become part of this solution. My biggest struggle in preparing for this was how much I wanted to talk. We could probably meet for 5 hours and just sort of touch on what I was wanting to, but I'm going to keep it brief because we do have less than an hour. So I also want to say that I'm in a really good place currently. I'm very blessed. But there were years when I was a single mother that I avoided homelessness because I was able to double up with family. So this is a topic that is of much passion to me personally, and also because I've worked with many other families. So just quick and furious review. This is so important on implicit bias. And I'd like to start by reviewing some of the characteristics here. And it's one, that it operates at the subconscious level, so outside of our conscious awareness. And we know from science that we have access to 5% of our brain. We have conscious access to 5% of our brain. Much of the work our brain does is unconscious. Can you believe that? I mean, so important for us to keep this in mind. In implicit bias number 2, characteristic number 2 is that it runs contrary to our conscious stated beliefs about who we are, what we value as human beings. All right. So I want to say a little more about that. I think that in other words, that tells me that I can be a school administrator, a school teacher, a school staff member, and I can say that I'm deeply committed to nurturing and building my students. All right. And at the same time, I can be an administrator, a teacher, a staff member that's leading my school in high suspension rates or expulsion. And both of these things can be true. That's what's so important here to understand. And that's because consciously I'm deeply committed, but unconsciously I may be doing harm in the process via my actions, lack of action or decision making. And then the third characteristic here is that it's triggered through rapid automatic mental association. These associations that we make between peoples and ideas and objects, and the attitudes and stereotypes that we hold about them, right? So what I really, really want to highlight about the third one here too is that these rapid automatic associations shape and mold our behavior every day, right? So it's not just something harmless that we think about and passes. It shapes and holds our behavior every day. And oftentimes this is in ways that we're not even aware of and that cause harm to others. So that's really, really important. You can see these definitions here. I always find it that it's important to start with defining with these definitions. And I'd like for you to just take a few minutes to review the terms and definitions. I'm just going to summarize them here really quickly while you're doing that as well. There is no single federal definition for homelessness, but you do see a typical one that's offered, and it's attempting to be broad. We also, it's important to recognize that often we will encounter individuals that are staying in shelters, so they are unhoused, that are chronically homeless, and that's because they have a combined homelessness that it's 1 year or more. I'm going to give you another second to continue to review that and just change screens again, and also be mindful of time. That's one thing I could have done better. Let's see. There we go. I have the time now. All right. So also individuals can find themselves homeless as a result of fleeing domestic violence or being in imminent risk due to losing housing within 14 days. And lastly, for those of you in the K-12 system, we have McKinney-Vento, the Federal Homeless Liaison Act, federal law. And their definition includes students who are sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, and migrant children who are staying in these situations are also included. I want to just take a moment. I should be able to see the chat here. I'll find it in just a second, but we're about to view a film. Gosh, it's not very long, but it's longer than I want it to be for the short amount of time we want right now. It's very powerful. Before we do that though, I would like for everybody to take just a second and via chat, can you please think of an unfortunate stereotype that the homeless population, that you hear about the homeless population? What comes to mind? What have you heard? What's the rhetoric? If you can think of a stereotype that you hear and put that in the chat, and I'll find the chat here. I see, yes, lazy. Thank you. Violent, yes. It's their fault, right? They can get a job. Addicted, on drugs, yes. More lazy, yes. They have substance abuse or mental health issues, yes. Dirty, yes. Drug addicted. It's unfortunate, but yes, oftentimes our bias comes from, we'll talk about this more later, but our bias comes from what we hear. And we have a serious lack of information, which gets in the way of us being able to support in our empathy. Thank you for your contributions via chat. Allow me to stop sharing screen for just a second. I want to turn on the volume and I want us to see parts of the film. I want to say that we can't see all of it, even though it's really short, just because there's so much to do. And I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but I did provide the link for the full 12-minute film to Anne, and Anne is going to make it available to everybody at some point today. All right, so just give me a second. Make sure that the sound and video are optimized. And let's start. I'll be pausing because again, we don't have time to see all of it, but let's see as much as we can. There it is. Okay.
I was homeless as a child. My mother was very abusive to me as a child. So I became homeless at the age of 10 years old because I had to live outside where it was safer than being inside my house.
I became homeless on March 9th when my house caught fire and burned down. I lost everything I owned. And so we decided to go camping. We drove across the United States, me and my dog, and came back here when the funds ran out and slept in the car until this place came about.
My mom passed away in September 24th of 2018, and we were in the process of being evicted at the time. And I ended up being escorted out of the house or apartment on November 2nd of 18, and I've been on the streets ever since.
I took care of my mom for 4 years. She died, I can go back. Too many memories. I've been homeless for 2 years now.
So there are a lot of factors that drive homelessness in Skagit County, and in our area, homelessness is a really complex societal issue, and I think we often tend to focus on the societal side of that, so looking at key drivers like drug and alcohol issues or mental health. But regionally, when you look at the causes of homelessness, a lot of it is tied back to a lack of housing that people with lower incomes can afford.
A large population is the elderly over the age of 60 that are in fixed incomes and can't afford to rent anything in today's housing environment. There's a lack of housing and there's a lack of affordable housing.
My name is Wade Colbeck, and I generally just try to find some place out of the way. I take home right around $1,000 a month, and that's just doesn't seem to be enough for an apartment, unless I could find something, you know, housing of some sort that's compatible, like 400, 500, something like that, so it doesn't take all my money.
Being homeless has a lot of effects on people, both with their mental health. It's very traumatic. They're a lot more likely to be the victim of a crime. They're vulnerable to the elements. Their belongings get stolen. Their medications that they need get stolen. We know of a lot of homeless people who have cancer, diabetes, are on oxygen, and it's really hard to manage those health conditions when you don't have a warm bed or a place to store your medication and that kind of thing.
At the beginning, it was like being dropped on the dark side of Wonderland. I mean, I got a rude awakening. I mean, I had what I called willful blindness. I knew homelessness, you know, existed in the county, but I didn't see it. You know, I'd see the people on the street, and I believed the stereotypes about, you know, drug and alcohol, and that's why everyone's on the homeless and blah, 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 blah. And then I landed right in the middle of it, and I'm like, okay, this isn't what I was told growing up.
Well, I've had people yell, "Get a job" from their cars when I flow in a sign. I've had people turn, just not even, they basically ignore me as a human. And it's like very few people will actually come out here and talk to us or talk to me. And when they do, they judge me for my past.
Every person who's experiencing homelessness has a unique story of their own. I think it's easy to generalize why people are homeless or why they can't get into housing, but I think it's pretty complicated, and there's a lot of reasons.
I'm a biker, tattoos, been to prison. So their perception of me is just from what they look at, what they've seen on TV, without spending any kind of time to talk to me to see if I can have an intelligent conversation with anybody.
A lot of people just can't believe that someone in as bad a shape as I'm in would be homeless, that, you know, they think someone would put them in some kind of housing situation, and that's just not the truth. There's at least 3 people I know on the street that are permanently in wheelchairs.
There's a lot of perception that people who are homeless travel around a lot and may come to Skagit County. If we build a shelter, it'll draw people into our county, but we know, through local data and national data that most people who are experiencing homelessness became homeless in the same community where they're at. And then we also know that people who are homeless aren't any more likely to commit crimes than people who have housing, with the exception of getting charges for things like trespassing or trying to find somewhere to sleep where people don't want them.
A lot of us are just people trying to survive. We fly a sign because we're hungry, not because we want to buy drugs, or we need gas, or whatever.
That become homeless. Just one paycheck, one getting laid off. It's real easy to become this way. You think I like dressing like this?
Don't judge a book by its cover. If you can help these people, help us through resources or education or whatever it might be, then by all means do what you can to help people, because that's what we're about, right?
Just don't judge everybody. We're not all the same out here. Just come out and speak to one of us. Learn to come to us personally and not, oh, you're a drug addict or you're alcoholic because you're on the streets. We're not all the same.
We aren't here to rob you. A lot of us are just down and out. If you want to get rid of homeless people, you need to help homeless people. We're not gonna just disappear.
There's no one cause of homelessness, and there's no one solution to homelessness. We have people who suffered things in their childhood. We have people who have lost their jobs and just need a respite to get back on their feet. We have folks who have mental health issues. We have folks who have substance abuse issues, absolutely, or a combination of any of those. It's a very complex problem.
I really wish we had time for the entire video, but I want to say that this is the work of John Bowie. He's a Skagit County filmmaker, and so we'll make sure that you have access to this full video here before the end of today, and perhaps Anne has already dropped it in the chat. And I really want us to recognize that this is Skagit County. This is where many of you probably watching right now live or have lived or visit. This is where I live. And so this is a testimony of our brothers and sisters. These are individuals that I often see and get to talk to when I'm downtown Mount Vernon. So this is real profound testimony. And I want to take a minute right now. I'm hoping that while you were watching, you were catching how these individuals are impacted by trauma. And so can you think of, impacted by bias and of course trauma as well. Can you name some examples of how people have been impacted by bias, something you heard in the video, and I'll go and find the chat again. Oh, there, I see the video that Kim posted. So hopefully ignored. Yes, thank you, Sandy. Mental health assumptions versus trauma. Megan, yes, thank you. They feel invisible. Absolutely. Get a job. I've heard that, right? Not treated as human, right? The dehumanization. Yes, all of this gives me goosebumps, because this is very real, right? This isn't a old video or something recorded in the other side of the world. We don't get to say, oh no, not in. This is happening all over the world. These are our brothers and sisters. Someone shouting, get a job, of course. Not treated as human. Feeling judged again, absolutely. Assumed to be a thief, not given a chance. All of these are ways that individuals are impacted because of bias. And so let's look at some statistics as well, because those are important. These are the 2020, that's right, 2020 statistics reported by the annual homeless assistance report to Congress. And so notice that the states in the darker blue are the states with the higher number of homeless. Now they tend to be the bigger and the most populated states. Okay, so keep that in mind. Washington State is one of them. So we have a large homelessness population. Causes. You may be curious about causes. You heard a lot of this, how important it is to not make assumptions and how complex it is. Let's take a minute and look at this. As to the causes of homelessness, we know that housing is out of reach. So more than at any other time, there's a lack of housing that low-income people can afford, okay? And without housing options, people face eviction and instability and homelessness. We have an issue with income and housing affordability. So low-income households often do not earn enough to pay for food, clothing, transportation, and a place they can call home. We need also to connect homelessness and health. Health and homelessness are inextricably linked. We know that health problems can cause a person's homelessness, as well as exacerbated by the experience. Housing is key to addressing the health needs of people experiencing homelessness. We also know that many are escaping violence. So many survivors of domestic violence become homeless when they're leaving an abusive relationship. And we know from data that most minority groups in the United States experience homelessness in higher rates than whites, and therefore make up a disproportionate share of the homeless population. And this is, as you can see on the screen, data from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Now, who's homeless, right? That's another question that we often have. And data currently, and data, we have challenges with collecting data, so keep that in mind. It's getting better, but we have challenges, especially in K-12. There's a lot of challenges with collecting who is experiencing homelessness and attending school. But what we know right now is that single adults are experiencing homelessness at higher rates. Also, children and families still are. There's been some progress, but still are. Veterans, also progress, but still are. And then the chronically homeless, and also the youth and young adults. The largest population, as I indicated, are single adults. And the adults that I work with currently in adult education fall under this category. So most people who experience homelessness are single adults, and the National Alliance to End Homelessness tells us that what they are reporting is that they attract less sympathy from policymakers and the general public than other groups like women and with children. So the assistance available to them in communities may be limited. In terms of children, you know, every child deserves a home, and we must, we know that homelessness is devastating, and this is regardless of age for children, and in particular, but for kids in particular, they have serious physical, emotional, and psychological implications. And then children that are unhoused are at a huge risk for emotional and behavioral problems like high ACEs scores, the adverse childhood experiences. And these emotional and behavioral problems often manifest due to trauma sustained as a child. And this trauma, as you can imagine, is severe, complex, and sustained. And so these ACEs are common in the unhoused population. In terms of veterans, our nation's veterans may face invisible wounds of war, and they make them even more vulnerable to homelessness. We've made progress, but still have a lot of work to do. In terms of the most vulnerable, what I'd like to say here is that physical and mental health conditions can be both a cause and a result of homelessness. And for some, these challenges can and do mean years of and decades on the streets and in shelters. And in terms of the young and the homeless, I've had an opportunity. I was blessed when I was able to work at the YMCA Oasis Teen Shelter, and really got to know them really well, and really opened my eyes. We need to remember that each night, thousands of young people living on their own go to sleep without safety, without stability and support of a family or a home. So just really important for us to be mindful about as to who's experiencing homeless. And it's because we've made some progress, for example, with women and children and veterans, we know that proves that we can address this as a nation. We have made some progress with veterans, women and children, but we haven't with other populations. So we also know that we are leaving some groups behind. And so we need to address that so that we can make progress with everyone, so we can make equitable progress. I think that's important to mention. All right, let me see what time. Okay, all right, doing okay here. So most at risk, this is important as well. We have most people that are experiencing homelessness are single adults. We get that, but it's also important for us to look at the fact that we have currently the data is saying that men are most at risk. So we have these most at risk is tied to gender, race, and ethnicity. So we have the majority of the most at risk population are male, and we also know that we have that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color are experiencing overrepresentation and are being greatly impacted by homelessness. I've already spoken about the uneven progress. That's the fact that we are making progress with some populations, veterans and children and mothers, but not with other populations. So we need to be mindful of making equitable progress. And then I also want to say that it's important when we're looking at data to recognize that our count, so our data is not as accurate because we have a lot of progress to make when it comes to counting, and there's a lot of efforts underway, but we got a lot of progress. So please keep in mind that more than likely this is an undercount. So affordable housing has come up a few times already. It came up in the video. I've mentioned it before. Let's talk about that. I think that this image says a lot. HUD is defining affordable as spending 30% of your income or less of your gross monthly income on housing. And so over 30% would be considered cost burdened, and over 50% is severely cost burdened. So what we see here is that We don't have enough housing, and we also don't have affordable housing. So, I mean, a single parent making minimum wage would have to work 72.8 hours per week to afford rent. You can see how this is part of the crises. So surely there's a lot of room for advocacy, and there's a lot that we can do here. And we really need to, when it comes to our biases and our assumptions of why people are homeless, we need to keep in mind that this means working 2 jobs if they can do that. And of course that impacts being around for kids, being able to take care of themselves, getting kids to school, all that stuff. I thought this was good for us to take a look at. The federal government is also involved because we have this homelessness crisis. And so they held some listening sessions and obtained feedback from 2,000 stakeholders across 649 communities. And they've published the findings, and they have created some guiding principles and a plan. And the guiding principles include things like housing as a human right? Like relying on people with lived experience as experts to create policy, and people with lived experience that are going to inform and that are going to be compensated for their work, labor, and expertise. It also includes, in terms of guiding principles, addressing systemic racism. And another guiding principle that I remember is no housing, not handcuffs. So, you know, the appropriate response and tailoring to the needs of different communities and many others. If you're curious, I'm going to have a link at the end of this PowerPoint with all these resources, and you'll see it there for you to explore. The image here on the screen is one that they published, and it's a powerful one because it recognizes homelessness as a systemic problem. It's starting with the systemic elements that we've been discussing, which include lack of affordable housing and economic opportunity, which then leads to precursors to homelessness, like poverty and housing instability, which leads to homelessness. And then there's the response, and which is, you know, insufficient most of the time. So there is, and notice at the bottom, there's also the recognition of that racism and discrimination that's experienced by the homelessness. And while homelessness impacts everyone, it is experienced differently by people of color. So it impacts people of color differently. So that's important for us to remember. And so the data proves that racist and discriminatory practices that are endured, right? This is powerful. Federal government's putting it there. Now let's make sure that they address this, and they do have a plan. And again, if you're curious about what their plan is and then when they're going to roll it out and all of that good detail, I just couldn't get into that today, but you'll have the link for this. It is, I just, you know, to close or to summarize this, it's important for all of us to recognize this systemic problem, and it needs to be addressed at the systemic level versus scapegoating the homeless population. Now, I know that there's a lot of individuals here that work for the K-12 system. So I also wanted to look at the data for total number of homeless students. And it's 1.4 million across the country. Notice that the state of Washington has quite a bit. It's high also in terms of homeless students. Now, again, keep in mind, this is an undercount. We still don't have we don't have very good, reliable data when it comes to counting our homeless population. It's doubled in the last 10 years. And, you know, it's unknown if it, you know, it was probably a severe undercount. We're doing better, but we still have a lot of work to do. So this takes me to me as a teacher, me as a individual working in the classroom now. And you know, I'm a teacher. I love to see everybody in class. I love to see everybody in class on time. I love to see everybody ready to learn. I like that. But however, I'm also a teacher that is trauma informed, that wants to support everyone equitably. And so I'm also looking for how the world, the environment is impacting everybody. And so I keep in mind that when families experience homelessness, and especially if it's for the first time, they might have zero idea where to go for help, okay? In cities and towns across the country, affordable housing is simply out of reach for families in transition. And so, you know, education may not be a priority when families are dealing with hunger, when they're worried about where they're going to spend the night with these stressful circumstances. And it's challenging, of course, for a child and an adult who is experiencing homelessness to learn when they're focused on these basic needs like survival and food and water and shelter. And so, you know, the stress and the trauma is unimaginable to teachers in most average classrooms. And we want to keep that in mind. Although children and adults can be resilient, they do not escape unharmed. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Because of their homelessness, they may be battling learning and behavioral difficulties. They may come to class suffering from depression, anxiety, low self-esteem. So this is why it's so important. This is why I'm so grateful that you're here today, because we must learn, we must train staff, teachers, everyone, administrators, anybody with the capacity to support, and that's almost everybody, to identify the signs that might indicate that a family is in trouble. And we also want to be mindful about having resources to help cope with crises. I want to mention that in doing my research, I found the CDC, Center for Disease and Prevention Control, and the Prevention Office for State, Tribal, and Territorial Supports pointed out that homelessness creates health problems, right? That result from various factors. And that's another thing for us to not remember to keep in mind. These challenges are in a classroom. To boil it down, for me, this is why you see the word relationship in bigger font and in bold. It boils down to relationship for me. I know that I'm a teacher and I'm heavily burdened by content and information and learning. I get that. I love that. That's why I'm a teacher. But I am also a teacher that wants to be equitable and effective. And I'm also a human being. And I recognize that I have human beings in front of me. And so it boils down to relationship. And I don't want to make assumptions, but I know I do, because I'm impacted by my surroundings. And the more privilege I have, the more I forget what it's like to struggle. And so when I see a student that is consistently arriving to class late, for example, which happens, you know, a lot, and they maybe appear disheveled or unkept, I can either take that as a sign of disrespect for me as an instructor, or I can become you know, be compassionate and empathic, and I can work on developing a relationship so that we can converse and we can slowly get to a place where we can have an honest conversation and brainstorm how we can support. And this might be the student, for those of you working with little children, it could be the parent. I've had students, for example, come to class, they're always late, consistently late, and I'm, you know, trying to I work on making sure I'm not feeling disrespected. Instead, I'm curious about what's going on. And just one example, one student was this exact scenario, and I developed a relationship when we started talking, and I discovered this student was homeless, living in her car, and making it to my class every day took moving mountains. Of course, she was a little late. And you know what? That was not a problem. And the fact that she made it to class was huge. And it was an opportunity for us to continue to develop a relationship and work together. I had another student, if I can share another example. Looks like we're almost out of time and I'm almost done here. This student was working with me for an entire year before I realized she also had been living out of her car. And so part of her strategy was to either come to the school gym at a community college, we tend to have showers. And so she'd come and maybe walk a little, work out a little. That was helping improve her mental health, would take a shower, would, clean up, get dressed, and come to class. And when that wasn't an option because campus was closed, she was able to afford a inexpensive gym membership, a $25 membership at 24-hour fitness, something like that. And she would do that there. And class, I really try to have a supportive environment so that people are learning and healing. I recognize that that's happening. And so eventually I realized that there was unimaginable trauma. Her story included unimaginable trauma, too much for me to even summarize right now. But it's just a great story, and it's so important this just reminds me of how important it is to develop relationships. To wrap it up here, we want to be mindful of our bias and how important how it impacts our assumptions, what we do and what we don't do. It also includes, what we don't address. To overcome bias, we must first acknowledge all the fact and incorrect information that we've been told, that we have picked up. This will help us increase our mindfulness and what we need to look out for. We want to step away. We heard this in the video, from generalizing and overgeneralizing. We want to center the voices of lived experiences. We saw that even the federal government is saying, wait a minute, we haven't had them at the table. We've making a lot of assumptions. We really need to. We want to really find those resources. We want to be part of the solution. We can and should develop partnerships with area agencies and nonprofits. And of course, we want to become advocates. And also for people in the K-12 system, we want to become really familiar with the McKinney-Vento core protection and services, right? So the kids that are homeless and fall under McKinney-Vento, they have some core protection and services. One of the links that Anne is going to send you is also the strategies for providing support, very adapted for K-12 educators. And you're going to get that link. It's also a source that I put at the end of this PowerPoint. And the last thing I wanted to say is last week I had an opportunity, because I'm always looking for learning and ways to help me understand and reflect on my biases and find my my knowledge gaps. If you're interested, there's a homelessness and mental health impact and strategies for effective care workshop that was offered by the Northwest Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center just a few weeks ago in mid-April. And Anne is also going to give you the link for that. It's already in YouTube. You can watch it. It's about an hour and a half long. It's great with lots of information. And that brings me to the list of cited resources. My goodness, I can't believe that I actually have some extra time. I kind of wondered if I was going to be able to cover all the information and have time for Q&A, but it looks like we do have a little bit of time. Are there any thoughts, reflections? What's on your heart? What's on your mind? Any questions that I could consider?
Claudia?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to try to compress several comments and questions from chat into one question. I'm going to give it a shot. It looks like there's a lot of commentary and question around, as faculty, what resources might be available to faculty for awareness and helping a student who may be homeless, but also do the colleges have plans, to the best of your knowledge, around how faculty can direct student to a resource, for the wraparound services that a student may need? There's a lot of compassion in the chat around how can we help, what can we do? But there seems to be a gap between the resources that are needed and the awareness of how to get a student to those resources. And if I got that wrong, for anybody in chat, please let me know. But I tried to distill down some of the chat a little bit.
Yes. Really good questions. Of course, I think that's a very valid question. And I think that's what concerns us teachers the most. Like I said, most of us come in to to do the job that we're primarily hired for, which might be to teach, might be to guide. We have different roles here. But again, you know, if people aren't in the room able to learn, it's going to get in the way. So I can use, and by no means are we in a perfect place where we want to be, and there's a lot of room for improvement, but we do have at Skagit Valley College, we do have a couple of counselors that are trained for crisis work, and that are very, so as you guys know, at community colleges, counselors, their main job is to be academic advisors, right? Academic advisors, not crisis counselors. But, you know, in the last few years, a lot of us have been advocating, which is something that you can do, to really talk with the college about how our students do have mental health challenges and crises while they are students, while in our classrooms, while in campus. And so we have been working on making sure that we have a couple of counselors that are available for crisis support. And I just met with them, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, and I said, tell me the truth. Is this real? Do you really have time? Because I have students. Are you really going to be able to meet with them if they come to you in times of crisis? And the answer is yes. Could they have more? Yes. Can we improve? Absolutely. But these counselors do have the time for crisis support. They're not the equivalent of 911, of course. These are individuals that are seeking help, and they also have the resources, and they are connected with the shelters around the valley. In Mount Vernon and Skagit County, we have 3 or 4 family shelters, individual shelters. We need a lot more. Yes, we do. But they have the resource list, and we're connected, and often they connect with me. We connect with each other. We're just working on making sure that we have an active resource list, and a list that we're always updating, meaning a list that is a real list. So if we're going to send someone to the family shelter in the Cedar Woolley area, for example, Family Promise is their name. We want to make sure, I usually call them and say, hey, you know, what's it look like? Do you have the capacity to help someone? And sometimes if all the shelters are full, we're able to send them to an agency that may be able to help them with some emergency funds until an opening might become available. But you're right. You know, I always have a resource list, but also our counseling office should have the capacity to support, and I think we can support them as well. I hope that that's been helpful. Did I capture some of it?
We'll ask people to respond in chat. We got a great follow-up on that resource question, Claudia. There's a concern about funding cuts. All of the colleges are experiencing budget issues. And so the concern is, do you think funding is going to impact some of the access to these resources?
Well, I can only speak for my experience at my college that I'm aware of. We're not losing our counselors that are serving in crisis capacity. So I not at this point. But this is where, if we become aware of that, this is where it's so important for us to advocate, because mental health, homelessness, these needs are coming to campus with the students. And they get in the way of learning, obviously. And so this is where it's an opportunity for us to become advocates and use our voice and say, you know, how are we going to meet these needs? Again, to my knowledge, that's not at risk in my campus. And lately, a lot of shelters in my area, because I stay on top of that, have been getting some, I mean, you know, there's never enough. Obviously, there's never enough, but they are getting extra funding to be able to help people with emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent housing. And so it's communicating with these providers to support them so they can support us, and to find out how we can help and advocate. Other questions? I'm looking at the time and the chat. Looks like we still have a few more minutes.
And if you have a question, please raise your hand or unmute and we can go ahead and take it that way too. It doesn't have to be in chat.
A lot of advocacy is needed and awareness. If we become aware of the need and the impact, then we become aware of the need to advocate. And this is work that we should be doing at educational systems. Recently, I was contacted by NAMI, the National Association for Mental Illness, for example, and they're willing to work with students to train students on advocating for more supports in colleges to help educate everyone and change the environment. So NAMI, National Association for Mental Illness, has developed a model to help students also do some of the advocacy. And these tend to be the older students, but they might have an appropriate model for middle and high school as well. That's another resource. Yes, so I see it. I'm noticing a comment. Some faculty have been or are homeless. Yes, this impacts everybody. Some people are a banana peel away from homelessness. Many people are, because of low wages and the expense of housing. We're not building enough affordable housing. And my understanding is that that's not just a Skagit County issue. That is happening all over the state. So I note that, and that is true. This is also something that impacts us. I think we might have any others, Anne, or?
I think that we have one comment about, doing a follow-on training offered at, I just lost it, but at any rate, specifically outlining strategies and steps for faculty, and working with students that are in a situation where they're homeless, kind of I think a practical hands-on guide so that faculty and staff can formulate a working strategy of their own. Really appreciate that comment. So I guess my ask of you, Claudia, is would you be willing to come back and work with us on something like that?
Would love to explore that. I really would love to explore that. Often this work, because of my professional experience prior to being a faculty member, is sort of just natural. It's something that I do, but we can definitely come up with a guide that will be supportive for everybody. So would love to explore that, Anne and Kim.
Thank you so much. I think we're just about at the end. I don't see anything else. And yes. Oh, Megan, can you allow us to save chat? Megan, you should be able to save the chat. I've been saving it and I'm happy to share it. So that's not a problem, but you should be able to, oh, I see. Okay, thank you, Becky. I'll share the chat though. We'll send that out via email and make sure everybody has that. Okay, so we'll definitely do that. Kim will not let me forget to do that, I promise you. Claudia, thank you so very much. I want to thank everybody for participating or attending today. Claudia, thank you for sharing your expertise and your passion around this topic. Obviously, it's one that's critical, it's important, and it's sadly something that we have to deal with, but I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to work with you on this, and I'm happy that everybody joined us today.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to share space, and there's a lot of room for advocacy here. So yes, let's do that. I really appreciate our time together. Take care.
Thank you so much. All righty. Claudia, that was awesome.
Oh my goodness. Woohoo! All done?
All done. That was
very good.
I had to get very creative with the video.
You know what? You handled that beautifully. I thought, as you were doing, I thought, there's no way I could do that. I mean, you just did that so smoothly. That was.
I just, I had to watch it and figure out exactly where I was going to stop, exactly where I was going to, and I was a little nervous about that working out, and I had a plan B in case it didn't, but it kind of worked.
You did a wonderful job. And obviously, clearly, there is a desire to have more professional development in this.
Yeah.
I swear I don't know what that's going to look like, but there was a real common theme around resources for faculty and kind of access. What's the blueprint kind of look like?
Yeah.
For faculty to know how to help a student and direct them. So I think we've got a real opportunity here. And I mean, I say we. I mean, you're the expert, but I mean, this is really where centers. This is directly related to workforce development. So we want to support this.
One, I hope this message came through, but we have no idea how many of our students are homeless most of the time. Two, it's because of what I do for a living. Like, I know all these resources. I'm in human services, right? And I'm out there in the community, but not everybody has them. And it might seem to me like a real, but no, we do need to talk about the resources so that people, and, there's always going to be some stress here because there isn't enough funding. There just isn't enough funding everywhere you look, right? But we have to continue to work on it and remain hopeful.
I completely agree with you. And I think the feedback in this particular webinar is just some of the best feedback we've gotten in all the webinars, very strong feedback. And very strong inputs. So I don't like that we have to have the topic, but I'm thrilled with the response to the topic. And you just did an amazing job. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I thought about it so much, but hey, it worked out. I just remembered, Claudia, just pretend you're teaching.
You did a wonderful job. You did.
I certainly do that with a lot less anxiety now. So I just thought, I'm just going to pretend I'm teaching.
Well, you know what? I have not been in any of your classes, but I have no doubt they're wonderful. I mean, you did a great job. You really got people thinking, and that's part of the goal with these webinars. So I thank you so much.
Well, hey, thank you for the opportunity. I always grow and learn so much because all of this I've known, but I never was able to organize it, right? And so I get a lot out of it myself. So that's why sometimes part of me is like, I don't have time, but I take the challenge because it helps me be a better person, right? Professional, but overall person. So thank you for that and for challenging me. I really appreciate it.
Well, that goes both ways. It truly does. I think it's when you're open to learning, and I feel the same way about myself, it's amazing how you can kind of shift your mindset or think about things in a different way. And I really appreciate that as well. So thank you.
Well, feel free to share the PowerPoint. Maybe you could put it in a slide or some kind of sharing. Do you know how to convert it so you can email it to people? Or
we'll make it into a PDF.
And then a link.
That's typically what we do. And then that way it's easier to email. And then I'll look at the chat, but and then we'll share that. We'll send the resource list out again. We always send out the reminder for the survey as well. I have no doubt that we're probably getting survey results already.
And because all the I spent many hours looking at the up-to-date resources. So all the ones you see as citation, please share them.
Okay.
It's the new information.
Yeah, we absolutely will. So, I know it's running. It's okay. We haven't said anything bad. Yeah. Sometimes we try to.
Do we know how many people made it?
104, Kim, at the highest, 104?
104, yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
And of course, some people they're just waiting for the recording.
I've been asked for that for sure, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll do that. But now I've got to run to another meeting, but Claudia, awesome job. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to come back around with you again soon and talk about some other work we can do.
All right, thank you. Have a great day and coming weekend.
Okay,
thanks, Claudia.
Thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.